After reviewing the storyboards, the client has asked that you animate one of the beakers that are on the table in the laboratory. Of course, as the animator, you're thinking, why would I want a beaker just to move across the table? But as the hired animator, your client is always right no matter how silly the request may seem. Let's go ahead and open a scene. Click on the application button. Open. In the Open File dialog, navigate to the Chapter 8 Datasets directory. Click on the file name Chapter 8 Animation01.max. The first thing we'll do is let's save this as an incremental file name, just in case something goes wrong somewhere along the line. Click on the Application button, Save As. In the Save As File dialog, click the Increment button. We're going to begin working in our Camera 1 viewport. It'll be a little easier because we can see everything nice and clearly. In the Camera 1 viewport, we want to select the first beaker on the right-hand side of the table. It's the one closest to the front edge of the table. After long discussions with the client, they've decided that they want the beaker to slide across the table from right to left. While one of the first things we need to take a look at, and something that we constantly need to pay attention to while we're animating, is what frame we're currently on. Here we have the frame slider, which we can click and drag back and forth on to change the frame number that we're on and allow us to move in time. Based on the storyboard, the client would like the beaker to start moving at frame 10. So let's navigate to frame 10. Click and drag the time slider until you get to frame 10. You'll see frame 10 indicated on the time slider and in the frame number indicator. Position your cursor over the time slider and right-click on the time slider. That will open a Create Key dialog. This is going to allow us to create an animation keyframe at frame 10 that records the current position, rotation, and scale of the object you selected. Since we're only dealing with the position, go ahead and uncheck the rotation and scale options. That way we only create a position key. Then click OK. Now we can see on our timeline that we've created a key that records the current position of beaker 1 in time. That way we won't have any animation automatically created before frame 10. Now we'll turn on the Auto Key feature by clicking on the Auto Key button. Remember the steps. We turn on the Auto Key button, we navigate to a frame other than 0, and we perform an operation. Click and drag the time slider to frame 35. Here we'll perform another operation that will create a second keyframe. From the main toolbar, click the Select and Move tool. In the Camera 1 viewport, hover your mouse over the X-axis for the beaker in order to limit the movement along the X direction. Then click and drag the beaker left until it gets to about the middle of the table. We've now created a second key by recording the position at the new frame. Now if you drag the time slider back and forth, you'll see that 3ds Max has filled in the frames in between those two keyframes. We have set the two keyframes, the program does the rest. Part of this animation is complete. Now we need to animate the beaker all the way to the left side of the table. Drag the time slider all the way to frame 59, click on the X-axis for the transform gizmo, and move the beaker all the way to the left-hand side of the table. We're done animating this object, so it's important that you make sure you turn Auto Key off. It's very important that you do not forget to do this. Notice that everything is outlined in red when you're in Auto Key mode. The time slider, the outlines for the active viewports, and the Auto Key button all indicate that you're currently in Auto Key mode. Click the Auto Key button to turn Auto Key mode off. You'll notice now that the red danger signs of the Auto Key mode change back to the standard interface color. To play the animation back, go ahead and click the play button on the animation controls. Let's watch the animation a couple of times, and we can see that the beaker is moving from the right side of the table to the left side of the table between frames 10 and 59. We've accomplished this by creating 3 animation keyframes. If we look at our animation, the middle keyframe really isn't necessary. It's not really adding to the overall animation itself. The beaker is not necessarily doing anything differently at frame 35, it's just passing through this point at frame 35. Let's do a little bit of timeline editing. Click to select the frame at frame 35. We're going to clone this key over to frame 45. We do this in a very similar way to cloning objects. Hold the Shift key down and click and drag the keyframe from frame 35 to frame 45. We've just told 3ds Max that whatever position the beaker is in at frame 35, the beaker will also be in at frame 45. Now play the animation back and look at the difference in the animation of the beaker. The beaker now stops for 10 short frames. We have cloned the key in time, which causes our animation to pause for 10 frames in the middle of our animation. If we look at what's going on here, there's 4 keyframes. Keyframe number 1, which is the beginning of our animation. The second keyframe, which is the beginning of the pause. The third keyframe, which is the end of the pause. And the last keyframe, which is the final location of the beaker. Stop the animation and save the file by pressing Ctrl+S on the keyboard.